Hello, everyone. I'm Jake Burns, Enterprise Strategist with AWS, formerly with LiveNation, where we did go all in with AWS, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we learned. And this is kind of from a high level. We're going to go through this very quickly, and if we have time for questions, we can do that. If not, we can do it afterwards. So a little bit about LiveNation, if you're not familiar with the company. It's the global leader in live entertainment and ticketing. There was an acquisition of Ticketmaster in 2010, effectively doubled the size of the company. Some metrics from 2018, delivered 30,000 events to 85 million fans, and that's on an annual basis, with 44,000 employees, give or take, depending on how you count, and over 10 billion in annual revenue. So in late 2015, we made the decision to go all in with AWS, which was a pretty bold move at the time. And the scope of that project was IT North America, so consisting of 118 applications, 668 servers, and a petabyte of storage. And that was the real challenge for us, was that storage. We had a challenge from the CEO, get it done in 12 months. It was a pretty big challenge. We got it done in 17, which was considered still a big win. And interesting statistics. So I talk about cloud costs a lot, even though I think it's probably the least interesting part of the project, but I know it's initially what most people are interested in. In my current role, I talk to a lot of enterprise CIOs who are trying to do this, and the conversation always starts off about cost. And the migration that I led, we had some pretty good cost metrics, so we can go over those. The second, we stopped paying for data center costs. We reduced our total cost of ownership for IT infrastructure by 18%. We weren't satisfied with that. We continued to optimize, and a year and a half later, we got that down to 48%. And this was not on an application by application basis. This is our total cost for IT infrastructure while the business is growing. So I'm going to go over a few just kind of major things that I've seen, things that we did well, and topics that come up frequently when I'm talking to other IT leaders that are attempting to do the same thing, and some of the challenges they have and my solution for those. So number one is to invest in your team. I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but I kind of over-indexed on this in my project. In late 2015, it was still kind of early days of cloud. Doesn't feel like that long ago, but it was ages ago in terms of cloud. And the perception from a lot of the technical folks was that this is just a big outsourcing initiative, and there's going to be layoffs, and even if we do get to keep our job, we're not going to be able to really be able to do the job because it's not a skill that we necessarily have. So I spent a lot of time addressing that issue early on, because I realized I didn't have to be disingenuous at all in calming their fears. I just had to show them kind of what I saw, which is, I'm in the same boat you're in. What I've been doing up until now is going to no longer be relevant. This is the skill to have in IT moving forward. And if we learn this skill, and if we go through this, and we're an early adopter, and we're successful, and we are going to be successful, then we're going to be part of a small handful of people who have this skill set and this experience. And we're not going to have to worry about job security anymore. So this is going to be a lot of fun. You have my backing and the company's backing with training, certification, everything you need to get it done. And we're going to be successful. Here's the plan, how we're going to do it, so you can have confidence in this, and you're going to be a part of it. So that took several weeks, and then we began a very accelerated training program. So one of the constraints that I was under with this project was, I didn't necessarily have buy-in from my peers at the time. If you ask them now, everybody was a supporter of this from the beginning, but that wasn't quite the case. And kind of long story short, I didn't have really any budget. So I couldn't hire consultants, I couldn't increase headcount. I even struggled to pay AWS service charges in the beginning. And so what that forced me to do was really depend on my team, because they were the ones that were going to do the migration. And so what little budget I did have, I spent on training. We took every single training course that was offered, back to back, brought the trainers to our offices. And because of the compressed timeline, we actually began the migration while the training was taking place. And this was just out of necessity at the time, but it ended up being such a cool blessing in disguise, and it's something that I recommend other people do intentionally. Because if you think about it, most of the time, IT training, it's kind of like a paid vacation, if we're being honest. You go to a remote location, you learn something, maybe it's relevant to your job, but you're not gonna really absorb it most of the time. So in my experience. By doing this training in our offices, at the same time we're doing the migration, I was essentially asking the team to do 3 jobs at once, keep the lights on, do the training, and we're gonna do the migration. So in the morning we would do the training, in the afternoon we'd do migration. So we'd apply what we learned immediately. And the great part about it was the next morning when we come back and the trainer would bring up the curriculum and we say, well, we have some questions first. This is what we tried yesterday and it didn't work. And we got really like free consulting out of it. And it ended up being a super powerful way to not only get the team trained up very quickly, but also get the migration done very quickly in those early days, in those early weeks and months when it was most critical, when we're trying to build momentum. And I think just about everyone on the IT infrastructure team got certified. Several got professional certifications, some more than one professional level certification. And anyone who's tried those knows that those are not easy to get. So a little bit on cost savings. This is really kind of the mental model on how you're able to save money with cloud. So essentially, we're exploiting the fact that by paying for only what we use and the agility that we have to be able to change our mind minute by minute, really, and change what we pay hour by hour, generally speaking, we're kind of exploiting that to try to get to as close to 100% utilization, what we're paying for and what we're using, in order to get that efficiency. And by doing that, we're able to drive our costs down. So you see this is a slide that gets used a lot and lots from the cloud economics team in AWS. And you see there's 2 sides to it. So you have these times when you're under-provisioned and you run into performance problems. And it takes a long time to resolve those because you have to procure hardware, make changes. It takes a long time. So that problem gets solved with cloud because you have this kind of immediate ability to change things, scale up, scale down instantaneously. Then you have these opportunity costs, which I think is the more interesting part of the equation because this really ties to revenue. A lot of times, as a business, you want to do things, and IT just says no, right? Or they say, well, we need 6 months to stand up hardware, do a POC, and that sort of thing. This is where the real benefit of cloud, and it kind of comes away from cost savings and more into innovation, but it allows you to just execute on things and allowed us as an IT department to just start saying yes to just about everything. You don't have budget, you want to try something, you don't know if it'll work, yes, let's try it and see what happens. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the 2 sides to it as I see it. And really 18% reduction in total cost of ownership is really because we understood this going into it, and we understood that cost optimization it's not a project, it's a way of life, essentially. It's kind of something you're gonna have to do forever till the end of time in the cloud, until you automate it. But it's a really good use of your resources because as you get better operating in the cloud, your costs go down. So this is kind of a visual representation of the support I had and over time and the progress we made. So the key takeaway here is, what I learned from this was, you really need to get momentum on your side in a project like this, especially an all-in migration. In the beginning, there's going to be doubts, probably less so now than there was then, because we have so many great examples of people who've done it successfully. But the key, in my opinion, from what I've seen, I think I've engaged with about 70 or 80 different enterprise companies in the 7 months I've been with AWS. So I kind of see the patterns. And if you start off trying to kind of boil the ocean or attack the most difficult workload, which is very tempting to do, you can get stalled. So what we did, and what ended up working very well, and what I recommend others do, is just take the low-hanging fruit. If you have something that's not critical and very easy and your team knows how it works, move that. And then attack the next one, and then attack the next one. And what ends up happening is two things. One is your team gets really good because they have hands-on experience. So especially if you combine this with training, you have them move the easy things. They build confidence, they build their skills. But just as important is you develop credibility within the business. And as you have success after success with these really little things, that could be just single servers or websites or whatever your easiest use cases are, then confidence builds up. And then by the time you get to the hard things, by the time we got to our ERP system, we knew we could slip up a couple of times and the whole project wouldn't get canned, right? Because people knew we could do this. So we had a little bit more leeway. So kind of the last major message here is just do it, right? Basically. Unfortunately, another company got that slogan before us, but it really applies to cloud more than other things. And the reason is you can afford to experiment, you can afford to fail, you can recover very quickly from those things. And so another really major theme when the companies that are very successful, they have a bias for action, as we say at AWS or at Amazon. They have an idea and they do it. They don't overanalyze it. If it doesn't work, we try something else. And so that's really probably the most important key takeaway if you want to achieve a project like this. So that's the end of the presentation. I don't know, do we have time for Q&A? Okay, thank you. I'm happy to take questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, how many people went through the training that you talked about?
So when we started off with the most basic training, like the least technical training. I think it was Tech Essentials. And that was basically majority of the folks in our office in Hollywood. So I would say it's about 50 people. And then we kind of moved on to the more advanced training. And then finally, we ended with like the advanced architecting in AWS, which was the most advanced class offered at the time. And by the time we got to that, it was really only like 7 or 8 people. Yes?
Can you speak about some of the organizational change management practices that you guys took?
Yeah, so organizational change management practices. So I'm glad you asked that because something I didn't cover here that's super important is, especially when it comes to containing costs, is governance. Governance becomes 100 times more important in the cloud. A lot of organizations initially started having this approach of we'll just give access to kind of all of our developers and see what they build, which is kind of a nice idea. But the problem becomes if you're not controlling it, if there's not some group of people within the company controlling it, then when your costs go up, it's very hard to identify where you can rein that back in because you might have critical systems mixed with development systems, and it gets very difficult. So people are afraid of governance a lot of times because there's this perception that's going to slow you down. But the fact of the matter is, and what I've seen and firsthand and other companies I've worked with is you go so fast once you start operating in the cloud, you can afford to slow down just a little bit. We're talking about going from 6-month cycles to deploy an application to sometimes 72 hours, right? So if that gets delayed by another day because it has to go through a group, it's not really a big impact to you. It's worth it, right, to have that control. So the biggest thing is really just ensuring that there's controls in place for putting workloads in the cloud and that there's a competent group in charge of that that's well-versed in the cloud technology but also has the authority to say no to things. Yes?
How did you deliver your training to your team? Was it online training? Was it on-prem 100%? How did that look like?
Yeah, so it was on-prem 100%. So we made this very deliberate effort that we're going to front-load the training. We're going to do all the training as early as possible, which I'm a huge fan of. It worked fantastically because the longer you wait to do the training, that's like the longer you're waiting for those benefits of having that training. And they only compound when you combine training with experience. So I think getting training as early on as possible. The only time it would be too early is if you're not ready to start doing the project because you don't want to have an interval there where people can forget things. But to answer your question, all the training was at our offices. AWS, at least at the time, I think we still do, but at the time, if you make a commitment to a number of heads, they will come to you. And I found that to be a fantastic use of time and also helped the materials stick because, like I said, the team was actually doing work on the same day that they were doing training.